When are you going to get a real job, Marlo? You're almost 30. This little hobby of yours isn't a career. That was my father, standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, holding a glass of red wine like he was delivering a verdict. My mother was at the stove, pretending not to hear. My brother-in-law was at the table, smirking into his phone. It was Thanksgiving, and I had driven 4 hours to be there. I didn't say anything. I never did back then. I just smiled and asked if anyone wanted more bread. That was 9 years ago. And for 9 years, I told myself it didn't matter what they thought. I told myself I just had to keep going. I told myself that one day it would all make sense. I just didn't expect one day to arrive the way it did. Let me back up. I started Luma Co. in my apartment when I was 26 years old. 200 square feet, a folding table from Target, and a laptop that overheated if I had more than 4 browser tabs open. My whole concept was simple, at least in my head. A curated marketplace connecting independent interior designers with small batch furniture makers and artisans who couldn't afford traditional retail distribution. The designers got access to pieces nobody else was selling. The makers got clients they'd never find on their own. I'd take a small commission from both sides. My father was a commercial real estate developer. He'd built his company from one strip mall in Ohio to a mid-sized portfolio across the Midwest. He understood hard assets. He understood square footage and cap rates and net operating income. He did not understand what I was describing. So you're a middleman, he said, the first time I explained it. For furniture. It's a platform, I said. Think Etsy but curated, for professionals. He looked at me the way you look at someone who just told you they're moving to Los Angeles to become an actor. Patient. Sad. Already grieving. I had asked him for a loan, $40,000 to build a real website, hire a part-time developer, and cover 6 months of operating costs while I found my first 100 clients. I had a business plan, I had financial projections, I had spent 3 weeks on those projections. He said, no. Not a soft no. Not a let me think about it no. He said, Marlo, I love you, but I'm not going to fund a fantasy. Come work for me. Learn the business. In 5 years, you could be running the property management division. My brother-in-law, who had married my older sister 2 years prior and who had been inserted into my father's company like a key into a lock, laughed from across the room. He didn't even try to hide it. I drove home that night with $40,000 I didn't have and a clarity I hadn't expected. I was going to do this without them. I didn't have a choice. The first 2 years were the kind of hard that you don't talk about in interviews because it sounds either like bragging or like complaining and you're not sure which. I maxed out one credit card, then another. I worked at a coffee shop 4 mornings a week to cover rent. I ate a lot of pasta. I learned to code basic front-end stuff from YouTube videos because I couldn't afford a developer as often as I needed one. But something was happening underneath all of that. Slowly, quietly, Luma Co. was growing. The first real turning point was a designer in Nashville who found me through Instagram. She used the platform to source a custom dining table for a client's farmhouse renovation, left a 5-star review, and then posted about the piece on her own account. Her followers were other designers. Within a month, I had 40 new professional accounts. Within 3 months, I had 200. Word spread in that specific way it does in tightly networked industries where everyone knows everyone and they're all looking for the same thing, something different, something their clients haven't seen. I was offering that. By year 3, I had quit the coffee shop. By year 4, I had a small team, 2 full-time, 2 part-time or remote. By year 5, Luma Co. was processing over $4 million in transactions annually, and I was taking a salary that made me feel, for the first time, like an adult. I didn't tell my family any of this. That probably sounds like a choice made out of spite, and I won't pretend there wasn't some of that. But mostly it was something else, something harder to name. When you've been dismissed the way I was dismissed, when someone looks at your dream and sees a hobby, when they offer you pity instead of a chance, there's a kind of armor you build. You stop needing their approval, and eventually you stop seeking their information. My mother called every Sunday. We talked about the weather, her garden, a show she was watching. She'd ask if I was still doing my website thing, and I'd say yes, and she'd say that was nice, and we'd move on. My father and I spoke maybe 4 times a year. My sister and I were closer, but she was caught in the middle, and I never wanted to make her choose sides, so I kept my work life vague and she didn't push. My brother in law, at every family gathering, asked when I was going to scale up or cash out. He was the kind of person who learned startup vocabulary and used it as a weapon. I smiled and said soon and went to get more food. None of them knew that I had already done both. In year 7, I took my first outside investment. A venture firm out of San Francisco came to me. I did not go to them after one of their partners used Luma Co to source furniture for his vacation home in Colorado and became slightly obsessed with how the platform worked. They put in $2.8 million for a minority stake. That money let me hire a real engineering team, rebuild the platform from scratch, and expand into commercial design, which opened up an entirely different revenue stream. In year 8, we had 20 million in GMV. I hired a CFO. We moved into actual office space in Denver. Nothing flashy, a converted warehouse in Remo, exposed brick and good light, and a kitchen that actually had food in it. I had 23 full-time employees and a waiting list of makers who wanted to join the platform. In year 9, the calls started. Not from investors, from journalists. The first was a writer for a design industry trade publication, which felt manageable. Then, a business reporter from the Denver Post. Then, in October, an email from a researcher at Inc. magazine who was compiling their annual list of America's fastest growing private companies. We made the list. Number 47, Luma Co., Denver, CO. 3-year revenue growth, 312%. I asked my PR person. Yes, I had a PR person now. To keep things quiet. No press photos. No founder profile. I wasn't ready. I wanted another year before that door opened. She agreed, and we kept the coverage to the list itself. No feature, no interview. But you can't keep a secret forever when your company has employees and investors and a waiting list and a CFO who goes to industry conferences. Information moves. And I had stopped calculating how many people knew my name. Here's what I didn't know was happening on the other side of my family's world. My father's company had been struggling for 3 years. I found this out later in pieces, and then all at once. The commercial real estate market had shifted. 2 of his anchor tenants, a regional grocery chain and a big box fitness concept, had both gone bankrupt within 18 months of each other, leaving him with vacancy rates that wrecked his cash flow. He had refinanced twice. He had let go of most of his staff. He was, by the time I understood the full picture, genuinely close to losing everything he had spent 30 years building. My brother-in-law had apparently been positioned as the solution. He had connections, he said. He knew investors, he said. He'd been making calls for 2 years. Nothing had come through. My sister knew more than she let on. She told me later that she'd been scared for months, that my father had aged a decade in 2 years, that her husband had become increasingly desperate in ways she didn't want to look at too closely. I knew none of this. My father did not call me. My mother did not mention it on our Sunday calls. I was operating in a completely separate world, building something real, while the world I'd come from was quietly contracting. The thing that changed everything happened in March. A property developer in Chicago, one of my investors knew him socially, was looking to reposition a mixed-use development on the north side. He wanted to attract design-forward retail tenants and needed someone to curate the commercial interiors for the common areas and anchor spaces. It was a different kind of project than what Luma & Co. typically handled, but the scale was significant, and my CFO thought the visibility would be worth it. We took the project. It went well. Better than well. In the process of working on that project, I learned that the developer had also been in quiet conversations about acquiring a struggling commercial real estate portfolio in the Midwest. A portfolio that, as the due diligence documents eventually crossed my CFO's desk in a summary form, looked very much like my father's. I want to be precise here about what happened next, because I've thought about it a lot since, and I want to be honest. I did not reach out to save my father. That is not what happened. What happened is that I flagged the portfolio to my own investors as a potential adjacent acquisition, something that would give Luma & Co. a footprint in physical commercial space that could become a kind of permanent showroom and maker hub. It was a business decision. My investors agreed it made sense. We made an offer. The offer was accepted. I became, in early April, the new primary investor and controlling stakeholder in my father's former company. He had been bought out. His name was no longer on the door, and he did not know who had bought him. My attorney advised me to let the dust settle before making contact. I agreed. I had things to think through. 2 weeks later, my mother called on a Sunday. Her voice was different, quieter. Your father had to sell the company, she said. He's okay. We're okay. But I thought you should know. I'm sorry, Mom, I said. He's embarrassed, she said. You know how he is. I did know how he was. She asked if I was still doing well with my website. I said yes. She said that was good. We said goodbye. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that call. The family dinner where everything came out was not something I planned. It was my parents' anniversary in June, their 35th, and my sister had organized a dinner at a restaurant in Columbus. Private room, 12 people, my father's old business partners and their wives, some cousins, my aunt who flew in from Phoenix. I almost didn't go, but I went. My brother-in-law spent the first hour of dinner explaining to one of my father's old partners why the commercial real estate market was cyclical, not structural, and how my father's situation was just bad timing. He had a lot of theories. He talked with the confidence of a man who had never been responsible for anything that failed. My father sat at the head of the table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He was still my father, square-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a room. But something behind his eyes was different. He looked tired in a way that had settled in. About halfway through dinner, my father's old partner, a man named Mr. Albrecht who had known my father for 20 years, leaned across the table toward my brother-in-law and said, "So who ended up buying the portfolio?" I heard it was some tech company out of Denver. My brother-in-law shrugged. Some kind of design startup. Never heard of them. Luma something. The table kept moving, conversations overlapping, someone refilling wine. My sister looked at me across the table. She had done the math faster than anyone. Her eyes went wide and then went carefully, deliberately blank. I picked up my water glass. Luma Co. I said. My voice was completely even. That's the company. Mr. Albrecht looked at me politely. You've heard of them? I founded it, I said, 9 years ago. The table didn't go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, one conversation stopping, and then the next, until the only sound was the restaurant noise from the other side of the partition. My father put down his fork. My brother-in-law's mouth was doing something complicated. I'm the one who bought your company, Dad, I said. I wasn't trying to hide it. I needed some time to figure out how to tell you. That was not entirely true. I had needed some time to decide whether I wanted to tell him at all, and how and what I wanted to say when I did. But it was not a lie either. My father looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the table. Then he looked back up. How long? He said. 9 years, I said. The company's been profitable for 6. We made the Inc. 5000 list last fall. We have 23 employees. Someone at the table, one of the cousins' wives, said, "Oh my God." In a good way, I think. Or maybe just in a shocked way. My brother-in-law cleared his throat. So the acquisition was a business decision, I said, looking at him directly for the first time all evening. My investors and I thought the physical footprint made sense for where the company is going. It wasn't personal. He nodded slowly. The smirk that usually lived on his face was nowhere. My mother was crying, quietly, into her napkin. I couldn't tell what kind of crying it was. Proud, or ashamed of herself, or something more complicated. Maybe all three. My father didn't say anything for a while. And then he said, "I owe you an apology." "You do," I said. "I'm sorry." I looked at him, at this man who had told me my dream was a fantasy, who had laughed with his son-in-law over my business plan, who had offered me a job managing parking lots while I was building something real. I looked at him for a long time. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." And I meant it. I did. But I also knew that an apology at a dinner table, however sincerely given, doesn't undo 9 years. It doesn't undo the credit card debt or the coffee shop or the pastor dinners or the Thanksgiving comments, or the 100 small moments where I sat across from my family and felt like a guest in my own life. I didn't say that. I picked up my fork and ate my salmon and answered the questions that started coming. Mr. 1. Albrecht, the cousins, my aunt from Phoenix, who had apparently been following design trends and recognized my platform's name immediately and said with some delight, I knew there was a Luma Co. in Denver. I had no idea. Dinner continued. The wave of shock receded into something warmer, more celebratory, and a little uncomfortable in the way that family dinners get when the story of the room has suddenly shifted. In August, my brother-in-law called my cell phone. This was unusual. We didn't have a call relationship. He had a proposal. He wanted to discuss whether there was a role for him at Luma Co. Specifically, he thought his background in commercial real estate and his network in the Midwest market could be an asset as we developed the physical portfolio. He used the phrase mutually beneficial twice. He said he was looking for something that aligned with his long-term vision. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then I said, I appreciate the call. I'm going to have to pass. We're fully staffed on the acquisition side, and the people I have in those roles are exactly the right fit. He was quiet for a moment. Marlo. I hope the job search goes well, I said. Take care of my sister. I hung up. I don't have a dramatic word for how that felt. It wasn't triumphant exactly. It wasn't cold. It was more like finished. The way you feel when you finally unclench a muscle you didn't know you'd been holding tight for years. My father and I have dinner once a month now. Just the two of us, usually on the first Thursday, at a diner near his house in Columbus. We don't talk about the company much. He asks about my team. I ask about his retirement. We talk about baseball sometimes because we always talked about baseball, even when we didn't talk about anything else. He told me once, over bad coffee and pie, that he'd looked at my original business plan again. He'd kept it, apparently, in a file somewhere, and that he could see now what he hadn't been able to see then. It was good, he said. It was a good plan. It was, I said. He nodded. He looked out the window. I was wrong to say no. You were, I said. We finished our pie. It's not a perfect relationship. I don't think it will ever be what it might have been if things had gone differently. There's a version of my life where my father believed in me at 26, and I built Luma Co. with his support in spite of his doubt, and I don't know if I'll ever fully stop wondering what that version would have felt like. But I built it anyway. That's the thing I come back to when I think about those 9 years. I built it anyway. And on days when I walk into our office in Denver, past the Maker's Showcase wall where we rotate pieces from artisans on the platform, past the kitchen where someone always has something going on the stove, past the engineering team and the design partnerships team and the CFO's glass-walled office, I think about that apartment. The folding table, the overheating laptop, the $40,000 I didn't get. I think about my father's face when I said I founded it. And then I sit down at my desk and I get back to work because there is still so much to build and I have never once needed anyone's permission to do it. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the dinner, not my father's face when I said I founded it. It's actually the drive home from Columbus 9 years earlier. The night he said no, when I was crying in the car on I-70, and I made a decision that I didn't even fully recognize as a decision at the time. I just thought, fine, I'll do it myself. That's how most real things start, I think. Not with a plan, with a quiet, stubborn refusal to accept someone else's ceiling as your own. What I didn't understand back then is that how you respond to being dismissed tells you everything about who you actually are. My brother-in-law, when things got hard, made phone calls and dropped names and talked about his network. He performed competence. I just worked. And I'm not saying that to be harsh. I'm saying it because I've thought about it a lot, and I think that's the actual dividing line. Not talent, not luck, not connections. It's whether when there's no one watching and no one clapping, you still sit down and do the thing. I made real mistakes those first few years. I trusted the wrong vendor once and lost 6 weeks of work. I priced my commission structure wrong and had to renegotiate with makers I'd already signed, which was one of the most uncomfortable conversations I've ever had. I hired someone in year 2 who wasn't right for the role and waited 4 months too long to address it. Every one of those mistakes cost me something: money, time, relationships, sleep. But they also made me sharper in ways that couldn't have happened any other way. You don't learn to run a company by reading about running a company. You learn it by getting things wrong and having to fix them with your own hands. That's what I think about when people ask me how I built Luma Co. I don't think about the ink list or the Denver office or the $2.8 million in venture funding. I think about the folding table, the overheating laptop, the year I made $43,000 and thought I was rich, the year I made less than that and had to decide in a very concrete way whether I actually believe in what I was doing. Integrity isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you practice in the small moments when no one's checking. Every time I kept a promise to a maker on my platform, even when it cost me margin. Every time I gave a designer an honest assessment of a piece instead of just completing the transaction. Every time I told an investor the truth about a quarter that didn't go the way I'd projected. Those moments added up to something. Not just a company, a reputation. And a reputation is the only thing that's actually hard to fake over time. My father is a smart man. He was wrong about me, but he's not a fool. I think what he missed, what a lot of people miss, is that intelligence without honesty about your own blind spots is just confidence with nowhere to go. He was so certain about what a real business looked like that he couldn't see the real business sitting across the table from him, asking for $40,000 and a chance. I got neither, and I built it anyway. That's the only thing I want anyone to take from this. Not that you need to prove people wrong. Revenge is an exhausting reason to do anything for 9 years. But that the doubt other people have in you is genuinely none of your business. Your business is the work. Your business is showing up with everything you have, doing it with honesty, learning from every mistake and refusing to stop. The rest has a way of taking care of itself.